How did crypto bros become such a powerful political force?
They should not be subject to the same regulation as banks.
Why is the right considered today's counterculture?
They're all way better than this!
When did clean energy become too lip-coated?
Confront the climate crisis!
Just some of the stuff we explore in the Culture Lab, the marvelous mad science of how the zeitgeist shapes our politics. Hosted by data scientists and pollsters, Kyler Van Ellenfitch and Gabe DeRoche. Join every week as they bring together data, their own insights, and a special guest to put a different loaded question under the microscope. Culture Lab, a brand new podcast from Air Quotes Media, creators of Curse of Politics, The Hurly Burly, and Hotel Pacifico. Subscribe now.
All right, you gloriously miserable accursed. Let's get this pod podding. It's Hurley here with Scott, with Jordan, with Fred, and with huge props to the nation of Helbukistan, population of 1, on their men's gold medal win yesterday. I'm not going to say the Americans beat us based on the stat. I didn't actually see the game, but based on the stats and the highlights, Connor Hellebuck sure did. Scott, you watched the game. What's your take?
Okay. We outplayed them, but we lost. And that's it. I don't like 3-on-3 as a way to decide the game. I don't like shootouts. If I had my druthers, we'd play hockey, which is the fucking game you played until the end of the game. So why not keep playing that and allow? What are we in a rush to get the Olympics over? We got to there's only 4 more years. Like, let's just goddamn well play the game we're playing until it's done. However, I really hate all the whining about, well, it's, 3-on-3 is the wrong minute. It is what it is. Like, that was the established. So we lost. Drives me crazy. Hellebuck won the goddamn game. I can't. I wanted to see Brady Tkachuk diminished and humiliated, square-headed, toothless.
Why that Tkachuk in particular? Why do you like the other Tkachuk?
No, I don't like the other Tkachuk, but rage and venom just oozes out of me for Brady Tkachuk. He's just a square-headed moron, and I want to see somebody. I mean, I love that hit on him by Tom Wilson, but I wanted to see like 6, 7, 8 more. I wanted to see like a Bugs Bunny thing where they lined up and like one after another they hit him, But anyway, it's over. So now I'm gonna stop. It was fun to drink beer at 7 o'clock in the morning, though. I enjoyed that part. I mean, with other people. Usually it's.
We were just assuming alone at home in your basement. So
absolutely,
it's good you paint a picture for us.
Right?
No kidding. Watching that.
Jordan, you're back from Costa Rica. You're miserable. You're angry. You're looking out the window. You're putting on sweaters.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not required to be happy about being back, but I'm back, so it's good. We made it. My kids were very shocked and offended when we piled them in snowsuits and sent them out the door this morning. Like, what is this white stuff? How do people who live here deal with this? I got bad news for you, friends.
Go dig for shells in the white sand.
Yep.
Fred, how you been?
I've been good. It was a fun weekend. I got to watch the Olympics with my kids. Obviously, some highlights and some lowlights with Team Canada, but also glad it's over so I can get my office back and not have the kids running it the whole time.
How does Nathan McKinnon miss that empty net?
Great. A question that he'll be asking himself for 4 years. That was tough. I will say to Scott's point about the 3-on-3, I actually wish hockey was just 3-on-3. I found that way more entertaining. I'm not a natural hockey guy, but I think maybe
a button I can push. And Lisa Raitt shows up. Come on, let's go.
No, look, I think there's something to it. I think Wayne Gretzky actually advocated decades ago of some kind of different sport like this. 3-on-3 hockey, I think, could be a really cool thing, similar to 3-on-3 basketball, which is great.
Hey, folks, how do you know that we have an actual conservative on the podcast? They're quoting Wayne Gretzky. So, I don't
wait 1 second.
I don't disagree with you, Fred, because even greater people than Wayne Gretzky, like Ken Dryden and Serge Savard, speculated in front of me that 4-on-4 was probably where the game should go. Yeah. That the players were too big and too skilled for that ice surface now, and that they needed more space out there.
I can remember one night you and I having a drink with Ken, or obviously he was drinking milkshake. You and I were drinking just rye out of an ashtray. But I remember him making that same case to us that 4-on-4 was the way to go. And it was partly a strategy to manage concussions, but also just freed the game up.
Yeah. So let's talk about the word government and everyone else is talking about these days. Sovereignty. Strong intent. On that, there's no quarrel, but weakly defined. In fact, some brands have reduced it to a marketing gimmick. By me, I'm Canadian, they say, even when evidence points to the fact that they're not really Canadian at all. To that, our presenting sponsor TELUS says, until there's a robust and consistent definition of sovereignty, Canada simply can't maximize the value we seek for our economy through jobs, investment, and national security. And our Buy Canadian policy remains vague and toothless, with foreign-controlled and operated companies who only have a footprint here, but send their profits elsewhere, getting the same advantages as genuinely Canadian brands. So TELUS is advocating for a tiered classification system, enforced against consistent standards. For example, Gold Tier, Canadian headquartered companies with substantial Canadian ownership, decision-making authority, and commitment to Canadian innovation and employment. Silver Tier, companies with significant Canadian operations, but foreign headquarters, substantial Canadian workforce, and meaningful investment here. And Bronze Tier, companies meeting basic Canadian presence requirements. In this exploding ecosystem of AI infrastructure and security, a strong digital sovereignty strategy is no marketing gimmick. When truly Canadian firms, TELUS or others, get top-tier consideration, profits stay in Canada. Data is protected. GDP grows. Our workforce and economy prospers. More next week. All right, here's the show. Matt Genereux becomes the third Conservative to cross the floor from Poilievre to Carney. We're obligated, I think, by law to talk about it, but we won't dwell on it. Our cursed clipping is from Don Braid, writing in the Calgary Herald about Premier Smith's 9 referendum questions for next fall, 5 on immigration and 4 on constitutional reforms. We'll talk about the politics behind that decision on her part. And defense as prosperity. Canada has its first ever defense industrial strategy, highlighting investing and building here at home. And we'll talk about that. And then it's the immortal Gordon Pinsent and our Hayus. So let's start with defense, Jordan Leichnitz. And we've talked about this before, about how defense spending has never been something that was high on the priority list of Canadians. In fact, almost always be one of the lowest things on the Canadian priority list. It seems to have more support now than it does. Where does this turning it into an industrial strategy play into that? Does that help buttress support for this massive increase in defense spending?
Well, I think that's the goal, or the long-term goal at least. And I think it needs to be said it's a pretty ambitious one, what the government has outlined here in terms of the job creation that they're hoping to get out of the spend. So it's like 125,000 jobs. There's only about 80,000 in the defense industry right now. So we're talking about a really, really, more than doubling, a really substantial increase. And I think the theory is twofold here. Is first that when you're spending such significant amounts, over $6 billion in the initial spend, right, is going to be, it's going to be important that people see some benefit here in Canada for that. And that's always been the premise of defense procurement in one way or another. The problem is that the systems that are used for defense procurement are very slow. They're very bureaucratic, and they're not very agile here in Canada. So the distance between the spend and the benefits that accrue in Canada can be extremely long, to the point of vanishing. And the value for money that Canadians get out of that spend historically has been really, really poor. So I think that, they've got a really big challenge ahead of them here in terms of using this as a way to demonstrate that money is creating jobs here in Canada in any sort of a time frame that aligns with a government, with the life of one government, for example, for one term. That's not going to happen within that time frame. There's also, I think it needs to be said, a pretty big tension in terms of equipping the military quickly and buying Canadian. Those things do not necessarily go together. If you want to quickly get equipment up to speed in Canada, and again, it needs to be said that across our 3 branches of the military, only roughly half the equipment is working right now. in all of those branches. So it is a situation that's been allowed to go on for a really long time. But if you're going to need to buy stuff quickly, you're going to have to buy off the shelf, and that's going to mean buying from the Americans. And if you're talking about building a defense industry in Canada that's going to export, guess what the biggest client is? It's going to be exporting to the Americans. So there is a tension here as well in terms of this actually, in a lot of ways, probably pulling us closer to the US in some of the spending. They are going to try to diversify markets, but I remember a pretty controversial sale of labs to Saudi Arabia. This is an example of what happens when we look to diversify our defense markets. You end up sometimes selling to some pretty unsavory people, some really dangerous equipment. So this is, I think, a pretty fraught plan. It's one that is really ambitious. It's one that the results on it are not going to be seen for a very long time. And I'm not sure that it actually solves the guns versus butter debate that we've talked about a little bit on here, where Canadians, when it becomes clear, so like they are supportive because of Trump, because of the 51st state threats, to be clear, not, for example, because we share a border with Russia that's having a land war in Europe. No, it's the 51st state, it's the Trump threats that are actually driving public support for greater military spending. But there will be trade-offs in this. When we are spending this amount of money in the military, it means we are not spending it elsewhere. And so there is going to be a gap, I think, where Canadians don't necessarily see the benefits of that spending, but they are going to feel the pain of the cuts that are happening elsewhere. And that could be a political challenge for the government.
You know, it may seem a touch un-Canadian to say so out loud, but the glow Canada has acquired internationally over the past year is just plain satisfying. All the more so because it was achieved without hype or bombast in a hyped and bombastic world. Canada has impressed the community of nations with quiet perseverance, straight talk, and resilience. Clearly, that admiration has been tinged with ruefulness and maybe even a bit of envy. As I said, pretty satisfying, whatever comes next. Anyway, no sector exemplifies those Canadian traits more than our farmers, especially resilience. In 2025, Canada's agriculture sector kept us fed, along with a significant chunk of the rest of the world fed, despite some pretty significant headwinds. Headwinds is a polite way to put it. Our farmers withstood Indian tariffs on peas, Chinese tariffs on canola, disastrous wildfires, and of course the bewildering cascade of tariffs and threats of tariffs from our main trading partner. Grain farmers are a perfect example. Our sponsor CN moves their crops, and with our farmers depending on them to close out a challenging 2025, CN ended last year with 4 consecutive all-time record-breaking months of grain cargo. That continued in 2026, coming in just shy of another record in January. I've said it here before. Canada has cards, things the world needs, grain, timber, and minerals, among many other things that are absolutely essential to the proper functioning of modern economies. CN moves it all and takes immense pride in consistent, principled resilience. Trade partners all pulling in the same direction throughout our supply chains. No, we do not know what is coming in 2026, but we know how we will meet it and that we will do so together. Fred, what was your take on the attempt to turn defense policy into industrial strategy? I mean, at some level, it kind of inherently means that we're not buying either the cheapest or the best. We're buying Canadian, and that's that could play out a number of different ways.
Yeah, I think the stars are aligned for this type of strategy to happen right now, where we're dealing with obviously trying to diversify our own trade and get things, our own products to different markets than the US. And if we're going to be purchasing an immense amount of product for the defense industry or for the military, it makes perfect sense for us to be building it ourselves if we can do that, if we can develop this strategy and execute it properly. That's of course the next phase, and the hardest phase is actually executing it and making sure it happens. But I think it's hard to argue against this. This is absolutely what I think most Canadians would expect us to be doing. most days, but now in the, as Jordan pointed out, with the issues with the Americans, that is an overwhelming concern for Canadians. So to build our economy and to obviously to build our military, which we need to do with what's happening in the world, I think this is the announcement is great. And it's a good start. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, it comes down to the execution, how they build this out. Is it going to work? There is risks with change of government and change of plans, and then things getting over budget and not happening properly. And so it all comes down to how will this actually be executed? How will they actually get this done? But I think it's a big win for Canadians. Again, 125,000 jobs is massive, and building our military is something that we've been a bit lazy on over the years. So I think it's a good thing, and I think the Prime Minister can sell this well.
You know, I think I must be out in left field on this somehow because I'm really dubious about the staying power of the support for this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it hasn't been ignored by successive government. Defense spending has not been a low priority of successive governments of both different political stripes for no reason. It was because you could get away with it because there was literally no demand for government to be spending in that area. Now there is because of the whole Trump thing and the whole that whole business. Now there is this support, but it's never been tested in a trade-off. It's never been tested in a trade-off. And so let's say we have an election coming up that's about affordability, or people are trying to make it about affordability, right? You want to have a big tax cut. Well, this defense spending program stands in the way of that. Or if you want to launch a major social program, this defense spending stands in the way of that. And I remember, because I'm fucking old, 1993. The Mulroney government had proposed to buy some helicopters. I think they were called the EH-101s,
Yeah.
or something. And it was controversial because it was a lot of money. And people are saying, why the fuck are we spending money on helicopters? And Kim Campbell, as a sop, reduced the number of helicopters that she would buy from what Mulroney was proposing to buy. And Chrétien came along, big campaign event, and said, I will say zero helicopter. And Chrétien signed my name.
I think he always called them the helicopter. The helicopter, no.
Anyway, that was hugely popular then. I can imagine somebody coming along and saying, I want to reduce your taxes. I want to reduce your taxes. In order to do that, I'm not going to buy these 50 fucking fighter jets from Sweden or something like that.
But on that point, this is about like buying from Sweden, the EH-101, I think were they Italian. I think what we're talking about here is building in Canada, though. So if you're saying we're going to cut this, well, you're cutting jobs now. You're cutting tens of thousands of jobs. So this was almost like the auto sector where everyone bails that out every few years.
Yeah.
So I think this is a way that could shift this into something more potentially permanent.
Interesting. Scott?
Well, I also think, the politics of this are different than they have been in the past, in that in the past, it often has been a guns and butter argument, or in the past, it's been a trade-off. Let's spend more on defense. Why? Well, because we ought to be doing our fair share, to which Canadians would say, an abstract, sure. But, in terms of like pinch times, especially when we're facing a deficit fight, maybe not so much. I think now the government is, I think, wisely positioning this from a position of jobs and industrial strategy, knowing that it can always make the argument about defense on its own merits, but fundamentally it knows that it's got two political ace cards. One is jobs, the second's Trump. And really what Trump means, and this is where I would have a little bit of a wrinkle on what you're saying, David, it's about sovereignty, right? Like it is about, I do think Trump has provoked a sense that we have to be able to pursue our own choices and quit bullshitting ourselves that we have those choices available to us. We're going to actually have to carve those choices out of all the other geopolitical shale rock that we face. And so that is going to mean doing some of this. I think there will be a grudging acceptance of some of the spend for its own purposes, but you're always better to put it in the context of we've got to use it as a lever to manage Trump. We've got to use it as a mechanism to demonstrate our sovereignty and put ourselves in a position where we can tell rather than ask. And then, jobs. I'm not smart enough for this subject beyond that. I'm literally like, I look at this thing and I think, my God, this is a scandal.
You're the guy we could get, though.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's not true, but I'm sure there were other guys that weren't. But all I mean is I'm going to be honest, right? The intricacies of defense procurement, the many, it's just going to create 125,000 jobs, or is it going to create enormous wealth for the 7 people in Ottawa who are expert and have been like wiring the system around defense procurement since 1983? Like, I don't know, man. I don't know how the fuck it works. It looks like a black box. They put money into that, and I don't know what in hell happens, but usually there's a lawsuit down the road. And so I look at this and I go, it'll be a motherfucking miracle if Mark Carney can actually invest this money, get a percentage or all of the things that he said he wants to get out of them, and not have like a monster mother of a scandal on his hands 4 or 5 years from now because somebody did this and a subcontract, and it turns out microprocessing thingamadoodle, a wiring system that was bent, with German technology, but it was sold through Saudi, and and like, I don't know. And absent a screaming lunatic who's orange and happens to occupy the White House, maybe that thing takes center stage. So I see all those problems down the road. I don't know what else. All you can do is hope and manage it as well as possible, but it's a massive amount of money, and money draws flies no matter where you are. But my God, do they draw flies in Ottawa?
Not to mention the inherent tension that will exist between the political leadership and the Department of National Defense on this, because there are a lot of people within D&D who believe that a military procurement strategy should be about getting the best equipment to equip the Canadian military. But that is not how the government,
I don't think they're going to have much fun.
And a lot of them are also very captive by the American defense.
Absolutely.
American
D&D will be
lots of
the
fucking
last
luck.
place. They will be the last place in Ottawa to realize the relationship with the Americans has irrevocably changed. I completely agree. But they can make a minister's life pretty miserable. And I think that's something that, like, they're, when they're not fully on board, it makes it a headache as well for the political leadership on this. And the challenge is, we're just talking about such vast sums of money, like $180 billion in procurement. The chance that some of that is not going to go sideways, the chance that some of that is not going to end up being spent on something that has just piss poor value for taxpayers is vanishingly small. It for sure will.
Right. There's going to be an ArriveCan app with a cannon on it, and we'll be talking about it 6 years from now. But I want to make this. I'm not as sure about the political. Traditionally, whenever you open up the purse strings on defense, that collision you're talking about between political leadership and military leadership, and then military leaders speak out on background and they dominate headlines, and they have the moral high ground in this argument. We need to do the best to equip our women and men in uniform, and I think that argument, I think Carney could just wander up to a microphone any day and say, you know what, I'm making 3 decisions that are in defiance of that because we have to consider how we manage Trump. So I'm not selling everything to the Americans, and I'm not buying everything from the Americans. And that is going to require a little more expense and a little more time. And there's going to be some sacrifice involved. But that's what we have to do in order to keep one hand swinging free and give ourselves choices. I think he'll be able to win that argument 11 times out of 10 right now.
All right, Fred. One of my other problems with this, from a political communications standpoint, and you've been in the Prime Minister's office, is what does a win look like on this? When is this policy successful? When do you know that you've done it? When we can defend Canada against the United States? When we can defend the North against China and Russia? When Europe says we've done enough? Like, when? What is what's mission accomplished?
Well, look, I think from the political side of things, the mission is kind of accomplished now. Canadians know, or at least he has a way to say he has a plan for this. Because this is going to take years and years and years. He may not even be in office by the time that this really starts rolling. But the win is, on the political side, is having a plan. Canadians want to know, do you have something? Are you taking this seriously? And Carney clearly has laid that out quite well. So that's the win in terms of the short term. Long term, I mean, it's going to be like, does this actually get off the ground? Do we actually have an defense industrial capacity in Canada that's generating all of this equipment, it's ships, planes, whatever it is, drones, and creating these jobs? is it an economic argument now more than a defense one? We never look. A lot of us don't know what the defense standards are and what are we capable of taking on other countries. Are we doing different things? But if you turn it into an economic one, and if you're making that 2 or 5%, whatever the NATO number, if it keeps moving after Trump goes, if you're doing that, you can tell the story. But again, if it's creating jobs and boosting the economy, I know like I'm from Nova Scotia, and we're the center of the Canadian Navy, and this will have a huge, huge, huge impact on that province potentially, and really boost it up economically. It could become a defense powerhouse in North America. So those things will have long-lasting impact. It'll take time to get there, but again, now he has a story to tell, though, that he is taking things seriously. He's showing us and Canadians that he has a plan for Trump and this new world that we live in.
So, in the last week alone on our pods, we've talked about Canada's new national auto strategy and a new national defense strategy. Changing policy that fits emerging global realities, leverages our strengths, and puts us in a more advantageous position moving forward. On those same themes, and with a new national electricity strategy anticipated shortly, our sponsor, the Canadian Climate Institute, says we are perfectly positioned to make clean electricity a top national priority. With more than 80% of our grid non-emitting, solar, hydro, nuclear, and wind power, Canada has the focus exactly right. Doubling the size of the national electricity grid and using our clean power advantage to electrify nation-building projects. This, in a context where markets around the world are racing to adopt electric technologies, and the costs of batteries and solar are plummeting. Countries that can take advantage drive growth and become more competitive because, as always, energy begets economic progress. And the cheapest, most abundant future energy begets more progress. The Climate Institute was on the leading edge of all of this, writing almost 4 years ago why building a bigger, cleaner, smarter electricity grid is critical for cutting Canada's emissions and attracting new investments to increase our competitiveness. They've identified ways governments can keep costs down for consumers as households electrify with better technologies like EVs, heat pumps, and other home efficiency upgrades. They've written about how Canada can build transmission lines faster while keeping rates affordable, and how to increase clean power supply, about smarter grids that shift power demand. None of it merely opinion. All of it extensively researched policy ideas for clean energy competitiveness in a changing world. And you can read it too at climateinstitute.ca. So I hear Fred Scott, I hear him loud and clear.
Right.
It doesn't feel like it works 2 years from now as well as it works today, right? I have a plan, and that plan's in motion, and we're buying stuff, and as a consequence, we're having to make cuts and sacrifices in other areas. But believe me, at some point, this will be what? What?
Well, when our flag flies over Belgium, and we say, "Aha, we took them." They didn't even. They didn't even try to defend their country. Article 5, my balls. But I think
Belgium would deserve it. By the way, they were the worst colonialists out there.
Oh, it was pretty bad in the Congo there, man. But they've got a great 1010 museum. I'll tell you that much. It's true. I think this speaks. First of all, it's difficult to know for certain what the context is going to be 2-3 years from down the road. You're assuming that there's going to be a deterioration of
scarred by Lyndon Johnson, man. Scarred by the Lyndon Johnson narrative. Right.
That's all that people are thinking about listening to this podcast right now. People are thinking, like, remember the example of LBJ because it's so current. I mean, I would there's some rough times between the First and Second War also, but I think it does speak to the ability. I think it means that the government. First of all, it might get saved. It might be that the sovereignty debate isn't going away for a few years. And I mean, eventually, hopefully Trump will. And I'm actually more optimistic now, and I'm never optimistic. I'm more optimistic after last week than I've been for a long, long time. I think suddenly we have some leverage in cards and all that sort of stuff. Which I don't know if we're going to talk about that later. But I think there's a likelihood that the sovereignty debate is going to still be pretty sharply felt in Canada. But beyond that, it speaks to your point, If you're in government, be wise. Insulate yourself on this. Start building a marketing campaign around this. It's going to be 3 to 5 years in its imagination. Start to be certain that you are making announcements. I'll give you an example of something that makes sense to me. Anything and everything that you spend in these next 2 years that speaks to your ability to defend the North and therefore make more real access to critical minerals and to make them a real opportunity for Canada, seems to me that that's a twofer. That's both a military and an economic story, and it's and they didn't get them right. Like Trump didn't get them, and Russia didn't get them, and China didn't get them. And so I'd be looking for that. You're going to have to tell and retell this story a ton of times on the assumption that A, people's fervor for it will dissipate, and B, there could be challenges to it that emerge along the way because of how things get done in Ottawa, just because it has always been. So I'd be putting in place a sustainable, long-term, earned and paid media campaign right now that just keeps putting that thing in a positive light.
I also think that there's like a broader story to be told about the whole defense reinvestment package that the government is not really telling, because a really substantial chunk of that money is actually going to the Canadian Forces members themselves in terms of pay raises and retention bonuses and all sorts of things like that. That is
reasonable housing. Apparently they live in terrible circumstances.
They do. And like, listen, like I'm a weird new Democrat because I actually do think that we should be investing more in our military than we do right now. But I think a lot of that, I think, is because like that's a labor issue, right? Like we ask our Canadian Forces members generally to operate with a lot less pay and a lot poorer living conditions than we would expect for any kind of a comparable private sector job like that. And so there is a story there because when you're making those investments, you're also making those investments. Like these are not in urban centers generally. Like these are in base communities. These are in places where that money makes a huge difference. And, you know, as Fred has talked about, can be really an economic driver for the whole region. And that's not just procurement. Procurement is actually the smallest and the trickiest part of that whole defense reinvestment piece. There are larger parts of the infrastructure reinvestment and the personnel reinvestment that are politically far more easily saleable, far more immediate, and have a real local impact right away. So if I were the government, I would actually be spending a lot more time telling that story than I would about the procurement story, which is going to be much longer term, much more fraught, and much more likely to end in some sort of a misspending crisis, to be honest.
Cool. All right, Jordan, that was cool, but you zigged when I wanted you to zag. And because my question for you is going to be, is this an issue the NDP can ride back to relevance?
I'm not sure they can ride it back to relevance. I think there's a lot of things that they need to do.
There's more than 8%. More than 8% of the population is going to be opposed to this.
I'm not. Right. Yeah, and I think it's, you know, and again, it's also about the why, right? Like for them, it's about showing what the trade-offs are. When this kind of spending is happening on the military, what is not occurring? What is not happening, for example, on healthcare spending? That means that you are waiting 14 hours in an ER, that you continue to not have a family doctor. What is not happening in terms of the transfers that are going to the province to support education, housing? I found it really interesting to see the contrast in communications from the federal government on this defense procurement plan versus their housing plan. Like, you know, here is housing affordability, one of the top issues of concern for Canada, and they've completely dropped the ball in communicating with that. Their plan.
I know what you're talking about. They're building a substantial new bureaucracy there.
It's going.
They've hired some big jobs in that place. Sure. I presume the houses are just flying out the door.
Just flying off the shelves, those houses.
I read something about houses that was still in the thousands.
Yeah, well, that's it, because their plan. They've allowed it to go out and be ripped apart by independent experts who have pointed out the uncomfortable fact that this is not actually going to build any houses, and then they've just kind of laid there. So there's a real problem, and there's a real opening on the center left to say that these are the wrong priorities. That the government, while they may be willing to shovel huge, truly big, and again, like, to put it in context, like $180 billion of procurement, like that's like 2 years of health spending in Ontario, like the whole health budget. This is a really, really big amount of money. And so the fact that they can get it together to put emphasis and political muscle behind this plan, but they cannot seem to get it together on something like housing affordability is really damning. And so there is space there. I think that though, for the NDP, they do have to be aware that most Canadians now do want a greater level of military readiness. And that's because they're worried about the Americans. They're worried about the threat to Canada's sovereignty that comes from Trump. And so there's a line, I think, to walk there, to acknowledge that concern, also to talk about the fact that, as I said, it is a labor issue. It is a workplace issue that our Canadian Forces members good pay, decent housing, and equipment to do their job properly. We wouldn't ask anybody else to do their work under those conditions. But there is a lot of space there to debate how much money goes into that, what kind of a political priority is, and what are the other things that are not being done while the government's focused on this.
How come?
All right. Yeah, do it.
Do it. Quick question about the NDP. That debate. How come nobody in charge said, "I'm sorry, sir, you can't come in with a straw hat, a garden rake, and a pair of overalls on. Like, this isn't the Louisiana hayride. Get the fuck into a suit or
Don't come
something."
after Tony McQuail.
Don't come after the Louisiana hayride.
No, it was fantastic.
That had Hank Snow and Elvis Presley on it, for Christ's sake.
I've been everywhere, man. I'm just saying, like, the debates are over, man. This vote's going to be in a couple of weeks or whatever. Like, Jesus Christ, that looked like a half-assed affair. I'm sorry to be a rain cloud, but
well, I'll have more to say about the debate in my Hayus. So,
all right,
I don't. You weren't the audience though, Scott. So I'm not surprised.
I don't think there's an audience for that.
For Tony.
The following message is brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Not all nicotine products carry the same risk. Smoke-free alternatives, like heated tobacco, vaping products, and nicotine pouches, don't burn tobacco or produce smoke. While not risk-free, evidence shows they have the potential to be significantly less harmful than cigarettes. Yet, Canadian regulations restrict access and limit communication about these alternatives, keeping adult smokers in the dark. Sweden has accepted this science, embraced smoking harm reduction, and driven smoking rates below 6%. Canada has the tools to do the same, but it requires political will. It's time to align regulation with science, expand access to smoke-free products, and empower Canadians to make informed choices. The evidence is clear. The opportunity is real. Canada can be smoke-free. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.
We're moving on. We're moving out to Alberta. I'm going to read you an excerpt of the estimable Don Braid, who's been writing about politics probably longer than Fred's been alive, and writes for the Calgary Herald. And he wrote this: "The separatists want a referendum? Premier Danielle Smith threw a monster back at them Thursday evening. Albertans will vote in a government-ordered referendum on October 19th this year," she announced in a speech to the province, the most consequential from any premier in many years. Albertans will be asked if they agree with eliminating many provincial benefits to immigrants. Most dramatically, the province will vote on a host of measures to strengthen Alberta and challenge Ottawa within Confederation. This is a clear attempt to win votes away from a separation referendum that could possibly be held the same day if campaigners get enough signatures. The immigration measures are not presented as constitutional, meaning the government could simply implement them after referendum approval. The constitutional proposals will be much more difficult to achieve, but they will certainly draw attention from the separatist campaign. That's the whole point. What happens if the measures pass and Ottawa simply shrugs is a crisis ready-made for the 2027 election. So here, Fred, what really fascinated me about Braid's take on this was that he thought that Smith's referendums were designed to either stop a separation referendum from happening completely or to make it weaker because these other escape valves were available. And I see it completely differently. I see every one of those referendums as more likely to animate separatist voters to come out and vote, and that each one of those has the potential to drive up the turnout of separatist supporters and therefore drive up the results of a separation referendum. But your take, sir. Go ahead.
I could say both could be true. I do think my first assumption when I saw Danielle come out with those points was to let off steam here. There will be a referendum vote the same day, a part of the same ballot. It's going, I don't see how they're not going to get the signatures. So I think this was an attempt to put some other stuff out there to say, well, hold on, you can vote for this. Let's strengthen our position in Confederation by doing this. But to your point, it could go the other way. It could go where people get more and more fired up on this, and they have other, it's how the story is going to be told over the next 6, 7, 8 months, however long it is, and who's telling it. We talked before on your Hurley show, David, about how who are the leaders of the separatists, the true, and I mean like the real accomplished names, household names. There's none right now, right? There's these people that have entered the fray that no one's really heard of before that are kind of out there saying things. And who's going to be Captain Canada? Is it going to be Poilievre, Harper, Kenny? Will it be the Premier? We'll see how this all unfolds and where these issues go. But I do think this was a part of let's let some steam off or out so that it kind of takes a little bit of wind out of the sails of the separatists. So if you're angry about certain things, you can vote for these things, but still vote against separating.
Interesting. Okay, Jordan, what's your take?
I have a radically different take, which is I think that we need to start to entertain the idea that Danielle Smith actually believes this shit. That it's not a distraction, that it's not a strategy, that this is actually her agenda in terms of supporting a separatist cause. She has spent the last year in a really measured way, ramping up and using her power to set the table for these referendums, to make it easier. By the way, none of which she ran on in 2023, to make it easier to lower the threshold for referendums, to make it easier to get them certified, to make it more direct that they would bypass even cabinet when they would need to be implemented. All kinds of changes that she's made that have led us to today, to the circumstance. And she has used her platform not just to pick a fight with Ottawa, which is, of course, a really important thing for any political leader in Alberta to do, but to do it explicitly, always in the frame of whether or not Confederation works for Alberta. So I think that actually, I think she might believe this stuff. I think that that's what she's doing. I think what her agenda is what she is laying out there. I think the anti-immigrant stuff is very much a part of that. I don't think it's a distraction. I think that is the agenda. I think that they also, even though I think this stuff is really reprehensible, particularly the immigration stuff, unfortunately, it doesn't mean that they're politically incompetent at it. They have polled this. They understand what impact this is going to have. And I think that it's exactly, David, as you say, that this is going to alter the turnout. This is going to increase the number of separatist folks who come out to this vote, because now they have a smorgasbord of things that they can latch onto on that. And I think it's really dangerous. I think, we've talked a lot before about the parallels between this circumstance and Brexit. And I think this is worse, actually, because unlike in Brexit, where at least you could say David Cameron was squarely in the Remain camp and he was trying, albeit not competently in the end, to prevent a yes vote. I think Danielle Smith is actually setting the table for the opposite. She is setting the table for a favorable separation vote. And I think it's really dangerous. And I think the more that we're honest about what's happening, it's probably better. And then the last thing I'll say, I think that if I were an Alberta conservative of any sort of mainstream stripe, I would be really worried about the use of this anti-immigration stuff. As we've talked a lot about before as well, we've seen this pattern in Europe too, when parties, particularly parties on the right, really pick up a heavy anti-immigration tone to them. It does mobilize new voters. It does mobilize voters on the far right, people who might not ordinarily come out. It does bring them into the party, but at the end of the day, that's a leopard that can eat the face off the party. This is not something that can simply be tapped into as political and electoral fuel without there being long-term consequences. So that is I think if I were a conservative, it is a very dangerous, it is a very concerning move. And the fact that it's happening in such a methodical and structured way is, to me, the most troubling part of all of it. It's her plan.
Imagine Ontario without one of its core energy sources, natural gas. The energy system in the province would be missing a foundational piece, and it would start to show right away, says our sponsor, Enbridge Gas. On peak demand days, when it's bitterly cold or sweltering hot, more than 30% of Ontario's electricity comes from natural gas-fueled power plants. Remove that, and the grid loses one of its most reliable players. There's more. 75% of Ontario homes rely on natural gas for heat. That's families, seniors, apartments, neighborhoods. Greenhouses depend on it to grow food year-round. Manufacturers rely on it for high-temperature processes. Think steel, glass, and cement. Farms use it to dry grain and keep operations running. Small businesses count on it to keep operating. This isn't a warning about a potential dystopia, but without natural gas, it might start to look like one, says our sponsor. Natural gas is woven through Ontario's energy system, playing a steady role throughout the seasons. It's an economic force that supports growth across the province. It's energy security, not loud, just dependable. Energy policy isn't only about what comes next. It's about understanding what already holds the system together. Reliable, affordable, natural gas. Now, Scott, who do you think is right? Your longtime great friend, me, or a man you've rarely, if ever, met, Don Braid?
I actually like Don Bray's writing.
Yeah.
I think he's smart, and I don't know if I would. And would you say long time friend? I mean, I guess we've known each other a long time. Anyway, just to caution you not to exaggerate. Look, I a couple of things. I hope Braid is right, insofar as I hope Braid is right that this is a deliberate strategy to dull and diminish momentum in favor of outright separatism. I don't have a lot of confidence that that's how this is going to play. And the reason, other than I'm a Central Canadian and I'm a liberal and all this other fucking shit that'll get thrown back at me on the internet, is I think it begins with the very simple premise that you're saying to people, you're right. So if you tell people that they're right, as opposed to saying, I'm sorry to break it to you, but there are fundamental misconceptions in your argument about Alberta being better off if it's separated from Canada. And while I have some sympathy for grievances 1 through 5, 4 through 9 are nonsense. And here's why. Instead of that, we are being told, that constituency is being told, you were correct. You were right to nurse those grievances. Your misinformation is actually valid information. And I'm going to amplify it and fuel it. I'm going to actually bring it forward in a dizzying series of 9 referendum questions that, well, I'm sure will be long and complicated and impossible. And it will be an invitation for division and scapegoating and misinformation on a colossal level, which feels to me like if that's how you're diffusing the bomb of Alberta's separatism, I think you're wearing oven mitts, because it just seems destined for danger. And I'll just add this, because I don't really know what else to say other than I think it's a flawed project, and I think it's dangerous, and I think it's going to encourage rather than discourage separatist sentiment. But I think there is, in the immigration proposals, there is just undisguised racism and scapegoating. Undisguised. Her own office, I'm going to quote, her own office, her executive director said, quote unquote, first of all, he talked about, quote, unsustainable mass immigration into Canada. And he also said this fills him with, quote, profound disgust. And then added this phrase, then added this passage. Why import from nations with failed systems where our Judeo-Christian heritage and principles have worked so well here? If you can't balance the fucking budget when energy prices have been pretty strong for pretty long, all right, I don't think you should be blaming it on a small class of and a shrinking class of newcomers to the country who are asking for healthcare when they arrive. That is not your fiscal and financial problem. That is not the fault of the federal government. And I just think it's the worst kind of politics. And I have no doubt, and presumably the man who wrote that believes it. But I think it's offensive and objectionable. And I think that
Was that her chief of staff? He's definitely worse than
The
that.
executive director.
It's her executive director.
Oh,
Yeah.
It spotlights people who, as a general group, are among the weakest people in our country with the least amount of power, and it falsely suggests that they are the source of challenges, large and small. And I just think that's bad politics. That's bad, period.
Okay, so I don't want to dismiss that moral high ground because it's very high ground. But I want to talk about something a little more sharply political that I'm really struggling with on this Alberta referendum, which is in the two referendums we've had in Canada, in Quebec. The government was proposing the referendum, and the government was the official advocacy group for the yes side of the referendum. And the official opposition was the official no side of the referendum. What's it going to be like in Alberta? I don't think Smith wants to be the yes side or the no side. I don't know whether we can leave the no side to Nenshi. Anybody got any thoughts how that works?
Aren't they looking at more of a California kind of model where you just have like a bunch of questions on the ballot and they're going to say, well, just throw all this shit on and we'll be agnostic about the outcome?
Until yeah, but who's going to campaign though, right? You're going to be campaigning.
Yeah. No. I agree with you, but I think that's which I think is a false premise. I think I don't think what I just articulated works in practice, but I think that's the argument they're going to make as they approach this kind of, tick of nuclear.
And I think
radiation.
the challenge for Nenshi is that you don't actually want the yes side to be, or the Remain side to be partisan, right? Like you want that to be open to all Albertans and for all of them to be able to feel like they could have a home in that argument. So you need, for sure, Nenshi will have a strong role to play, and I think should probably point out that this is nowhere really on most normal Albertans' list of priorities and is now consuming the government's attention, among other things. But for him to lead it, like it would make it less of a welcoming place for people who are on the more conservative side of the spectrum. So you're going to need other voices. You're going to need a diversity of voices, and I imagine somebody like Jason Kenney will have a role to play. There's lots of people in Alberta of all stripes who think that this is batshit crazy and this is their moment to come out and to have a homegrown Remain campaign.
Is there going to be an official no side with fundraising and advertising and tours and events or are we just going to sit and watch this fucking vote happen?
I think there's an expectation. Someone needs to step up. There's a lot of strong leaders from Alberta on the conservative spectrum in particular who are pro-Canadian, and they will, I'm confident that they will step up and do that. We've seen Kenny out a lot. On a lot of things.
Jason's fantastic. But I mean, does he have, bluntly, the moral authority to lead that thing?
I think leadership, I don't think it's about moral authority. It's who can lead, who can come out and champion and be Captain Canada here and advocate for these things. I think whoever's the good, the best storyteller and communicator and to get people fired up on this can do that. But, watching all of this, though, how this unfolds, it's going to be interesting. We see in Quebec where, traditionally there's been the nationalist federalist fights over the last number of decades. The CAQ kind of changed the game a bit, but maybe only briefly if they're on their way out. What happens in Alberta after this as well? Let's say they all vote to stay, but if we create this, if this nationalist separatist movement grows there, and it somehow gets some prominent people or someone becomes prominent over the next 6 months, do they launch a new political entity there, be it provincial or maybe federal, right? Like the Reform Party wasn't that long ago where the West wants in. Is something going to be birthed from this whole situation that changes the federal game as well?
Interesting. All right. So our last topic for today happened early last week. So all of you have talked about this ad nauseum on the various panels and things on which you appear. But there was another floor crosser last week, Matt Genereux from Edmonton, who attempted to cross the floor and was blocked last fall, decided to quit instead, reconsidered and crossed, saw an opening, saw a window, and he ran across the floor. And is there anything new to say about this? Is there, at the end of the week of thinking about this, Scott, is there any consequence to this?
Oh, I think there's consequence and implication to it. But I don't know if there's much new to be said. I mean, I continue.
What's the consequence? One more guy that was thinking about leaving last fall. There's no real indication anything new happened.
Oh, I think there's other consequences. I mean, I think there's obvious consequences in terms of, I think it makes a bad thing worse for Pierre Poilievre, and maybe I can't judge within the Conservative Party. He gets a big mandate from the grassroots, but then caucus has got to be feeling kind of nervous as they look at the polls and how this obviously weakens him. but there's obviously implications on the other side of the house. I mean, now if you end up with a majority that has been secured through defections, that means you're probably not going to call an election, even though, like, there's a new poll out this morning. Liaison shows a 12-point lead for at the party label level, at the 12-point lead for the Liberals. At some point, don't you want to try to bank that? How do you bank that without looking completely opportunistic? But if you end up with a majority, a parliamentary majority by way of defection, then A, those who are arguing to the prime minister, let's have an election, probably lose that argument. B, I do think there's going to be something of an asterisk on it. It creates some challenges for Carney. Because he has to talk about raw politics and why that's a legitimate thing, and there'll be lots of people challenging him on it. I think those challenges are, I'm not sure how legitimate they are, but he's going to have to talk about that.
You don't think that what the polls say is that there's general support for Carney to have a majority, and people aren't going to give a shit what the mechanism is?
I think by and large, I just don't want to, like, there's danger for him to, like, get into a protracted discussion in front of the microphones about why this is in the parliamentary tradition and okay and yada yada. I just don't think any of that's a good look for him as a guy who's supposed to be above raw politics. And then, I think the obvious big question, and I'm trying not, in all honesty, because I don't want to be a broken record, come on here every week and say the same thing about Polyev, but what is the answer to it? I mean, they sort of diminish it and then discredit it and all that kind of stuff. But, like, what's the answer? Like, what is Polyev going to do? Like, it's a fucking fact that this makes him weaker. He looks weaker. It's going to harm him in the polls. It makes him look less strong and less confident and less capable. So what is he going to do to try to shift that? And I don't know what the answer is, but I don't see any evidence that they've galvanized a response to it.
I think it's the 15th of his problems. It's a symptom. It's not his problem. It's a symptom of his problems.
Sure.
I say, well, we'll see, because he's got his economic club speech about the relationship with the US coming up this week. I think it's Tuesday. So that's an opportunity for sure for him to signal whether his cooperation and engagement on the issue that we've seen since the leadership vote, whether that's actually
just stop for a second. At the risk of getting yelled at by all the internet people who say I interrupt you all the time, Jordan, tell me that he's not going to go there and say the same thing he's been saying.
Well, I don't know what he's going to do, but I think if he goes there and says the same thing he's going to be saying, that he's been saying, then I think that's a big problem for him, because the departures are a symptom. They're not just a symptom of his inability to get his hands around the issue of Trump and the relationship with the U.S., but I'd say in particular, Jean Roux's departure, this is also about just like the shitty negative caucus management that was allowed to flourish over there for a really long period where they were in the lead. And I think we can talk about Jean Roux himself and the experience he had when he was contemplating leaving earlier. And the reaction that came from Scheer, from Polyev about that. Like, this is not a happy group of people. Like, the Conservative caucus is not a happy place to be right now. There's a lot of people there who were in there because they were hoping that they were going to form government. And now they are in a place that has really big loser energy. And I would say something that has emerged more over the last week that has changed is that you are now seeing that gap at the party label level growing. So that is new. Like, that is a worsening indicator for Polyev. It's not just him now. Like, now he is really dragging the party down itself. And the fact that the departure happened after the leadership vote. It's sort of that drip, drip, drip of more and more. Are there others? There are rumors that there are. It will be continual blows to his leadership. But then the flip side of the coin too is that so you've got these people leaving. And then who does he keep? Who is he stuck with? He's stuck with Jamil Javani. He's stuck with some people on the bench there that are liabilities, that are detracting from any type of a message change that he would want to do. And who, by the way, I think that if you're a caucus member there and you're looking around at how people are being treated.
Just be careful. You missed a show, by the way.
No, I caught the fallout from that show. My criticisms about Giovanni pertain entirely to his behavior. Entirely. Because there's lots there, friends. And listen, so I think that you're stuck with him. And so there's this perception that he's allowed to go out and, say, like, go to Breitbart and say that Canadians are having a hissy fit and overreacting to the United States. And then, whereas other caucus members
You couldn't
are
focus test a worse thing to say, by the way.
totally.
You literally could not come out of
Yeah.
focus groups
Well,
with
no,
a worse hissy fit.
And I think he managed to be like also racist and talking about people going off the reservation and like, so, it's really, it was the full meal deal for Giovanni there. And of course, the news outlet of choice, Breitbart really sends exactly the type of signal you want to send that you're serious on this. So I think that the overall picture is actually this week is probably far worse for Poilievre when you look at how the polls have compounded just some of that downward momentum that he's experiencing. And it really is focused on his leadership.
Fred, go ahead. Yeah, we'll go right ahead.
Well, just, 2 weeks ago, it was the last time the Conservative caucus met, and I'm told it was a very hot caucus. There was a lot of angst. That was before Giovanni's hissy fit comments. That was before Jenna floor crossing. So this week, when caucus meets, when the House is back, I think that'll be a very interesting meeting. Poilievre he absolutely needs to figure out what his path is and get on it. He's not on it right now. Maybe, as Jordan mentioned, the economic club speech, hopefully for his sake, there's something there that can show that he has a plan here, that he's doing something. But, we're going into this, there's 3 by-elections coming up. Terrebonne may be the deciding factor whether Carney gets his majority. And how does caucus react after that? And how does the general public and the polling, like, what continues to hurt the party is that people continue to talk about this. We continue to talk about the dysfunction that seems to be happening here. And until he can get through this, if he can get through this, he's going to be in trouble.
But if you look behind this, Fred, what do you think is going on? Because, for example, I would assume that one of the reasons I haven't been able to do regressions or the kind of advanced analysis you'd want to do to find this out. But I assume that one of the reasons why the party gap is opening up is because the Liberals have either closed the gap or taken over most of the economic credibility on most of the economic issues, right?
Yep.
Leaving the Conservatives really only with immigration and crime as their core strengths. And that's a very different situation than when Carney owned Trump in America and the Conservatives owned the economy. That's a very, very different situation. And that, I wouldn't believe, has anything to do with what Genereux decided to do. So what do you think is going on that the Conservative advantage over core domestic issues is diminishing?
Well, ultimately, the big issue is, in a sense, we have a progressive conservative prime minister. That's very hard to compete with as a conservative. He is bringing in center right type policies and looks capable of dealing with it. The Liberal brand was in the absolute gutter for years, the last number of years under Trudeau, and 4 mandates is really hard to do. A 5th is near impossible. John A. Macdonald did it, and I think King and Saint Laurent did it together. Going for a 5th and the next one, incredibly difficult. But Carney, I think, has reset that Liberal brand, or is in the process of resetting it, where he's washing away the Trudeau years and has recalibrated it. So absolutely, we're seeing those upticks in affordability, crime, that people are now seeing the Liberals have more faith in them than they did in the past. So that changes the game. And if we're not on the battlefield at all on Trump, then that gives them an even bigger advantage here. So I think what Poilievre needs to do is get on the Trump and tariff battlefield, but also somehow get that mojo back that he had. I bet you he could still get major crowds when he goes out. He needs to get out doing that, but he needs the right message that is more positive and forward thinking. And I think he's got to start showing that. I know he's doing the economic club, but go back and start doing these rallies if you can. Once he gets that message, go into the spring and summer, and then hopefully in the fall, he'll come back in a much stronger position. But because if he's not in the fall, I think, we have Quebec election, we have the Alberta referendum. And where is he in the polls? I think that's when caucus, they're the only ones who can remove him as leader now, unless he decides on his own. That is going to be a time, I think, where, things could make or break.
But Fred, I have a question. Like, don't you think the rallies are part of the problem? Like, in the sense that it oriented the leadership and the campaign all around those really like relatively marginal voices, the Twitter sphere, the Reddit, like it seemed to really be a problem in the end for him, even though it showed momentum.
I don't see it that way, because if you go back to the last election, like the last like week and a half, he closed the gap significantly, and it was those rallies and those images, but also just his message was resonating there because Trump was disappeared from the, people weren't talking about Trump the last week of the campaign as much.
Yeah, I feel like it has
So
more to do with that than it did with the
but
rallies.
it's still, but he still had that oomph. He had that, caucus could see that too, though, right? It's about rallying behind the leader and seeing his strength. And if he's pulling out these massive crowds, you feel a little bit more confident that, okay, this guy still has it. This guy can still lead us into an election and do something. And I think it's all about, as well, not just the public numbers, but showing the team that he has a massive following that is real, that got 140 some seats in the last election. I'm not saying any of this will work. I'm not saying they'll get the right message, but if they do this, I think that's the path to try to save his leadership.
Well, very unwisely, I'm going to wade back into Jamil Jabani, because if Poilievre has a new strategy for this economic club speech about the United States and about conservative messaging on the United States, I'm very curious as to why he didn't road test it in response to Jabani. Because Giovanni gave him a perfect straw man, a perfect pinata to hit. I mean, hissy fit is just so far out there in the way you would describe how Canadians would describe how Canada's reacting to this, that it merited a complete shutdown, which did not happen. It just, that's his opinion. I have my own opinion. I happen to be the leader. That's the mildest possible response that you could possibly have to that. So, Scott, why?
Well, because of other internal considerations. I think they know, if they look at Giovanni's track record, and if they look at the fact that Giovanni went on Breitbart, not because he thought you and Jordan and I would like that, but because the 25%, or I don't know what the proper number is. I don't know if it's 20, 25, 35%, but there is a sizable constituency within the current conservative coalition that
50%.
Pierre Poilievre has designed that
50%.
is comfortable with that channel, likes what's being said on it. And so he's staking claim, right? He's like, he's a claim jumper. He is a claim jumper on Poilievre right now. And so I think they're trying to figure out, is it possible to manage this without having to visibly, in the town square, in full sight of the entire country and all conservatives, take this guy out? And so I think, and I have sympathy, I think, on a tactical level for them trying to figure that out. But the degree to which it draws you right back to this central challenge that he can't escape of, well, what is your formula on Trump and America and Canada? And from that, what flows? Like, you also don't have a coherent critique of the government and the prime minister. The fundamental critique right now is, well, you know what? He said he was going to get a deal and he didn't get a deal. I think Canadians are like, I don't actually know I want a fucking deal. I don't want one of those EU deals that sucks dick. And then we end up in a situation where he ignores it anyway. So I think they have to have a different, our core critique of Carney that resonates with people and sets them up for success. So you add all those things together, it comes back to the economic club, it comes back to the speech, and I don't want to put too much pressure on it, but it's he's got to sort of get right. By the way, also, let's not forget the obvious, right? A truth bomb has exploded on this guy, right? He was supposed to win the election, he lost it. He was supposed to win his riding, he lost it. He now looks like he may lose a parliamentary majority. At some point, people go, you're not a winner. You are a loser. That is a problem. It's not just people like me saying it. He's starting, I think, to encounter a lot of conservatives saying it. They're whispering it now. They may be shouting it by Christmas.
And I would just say, David, I've never heard a leader in a position of internal strength use that response to a caucus member being offside. That is something you pull off the shelf when your leader is weak internally.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I got to say, floor crossers, they were so angry in their response to Genereux. But the best response I ever heard to a floor crosser was a leader in Saskatchewan, Dave Stewart, when a couple of people across the floor from the Liberals to the Conservatives. He said, it's a great move. In one fell swoop, they've increased the average IQ of both caucuses. All right, Gordon Pinsent, please gather our listeners from wherever they have dispersed and get them ready for the Hayus.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hayus are about to begin.
All right, Fred, one of the things you're going to learn is that Jordan sat in the front of the class, always had her hand up, always ready with a hey you. But do you have one?
I do. I want to give a hey you to Brad Jacobs and his team for winning gold in curling.
Oh my God! Listen
There's
to this.
2 million 2 million curlers in the world. 1 million live in Canada, so it's nice to see us actually win a gold medal in curling. It seems rare. I think it's crazy that Sweden gets there's 20,000 curlers and they got 2 of the 3 gold medals this one. So I am hey you to Brad Jacobs and his team for pulling off something crazy.
What's with the finger?
He's
What's with the
answered
finger?
that. He answered that with victory, David. Don't be a rain cloud. There were probably
that is too wholesome for the show. Like
there were probably
really nice
at North Toronto Arena on Sunday morning. Was it Sunday? Saturday morning, I should say. Saturday for hockey, early afternoon, I guess. There were probably 80 people gathered, not in the rink, but around the TV in the outer area watching Brad Jacobs win that. So that was fun.
Well, when I was playing jam can curling, back in the mid 1970s, you just had to then you just touch it with your finger and you give it that little extra English, English. Yeah. All right.
Tear your heroes down, you son of a bitch.
Jordan.
So my hey you this week is going out to the 100,000 souls who have NDP memberships and will be voting in the upcoming vote at the end of the month. We had the debate last week, which was, I think, very ably moderated by Hannah Thibodeau. So thank you for doing that. But I think there was something really missing in terms of the urgency of the discussion around that debate. There was a lot of policy discussion, which God bless us. As New Democrats, we love that. That is our happy place. We will talk policy forever. But of course, there are 2 problems with that, which is the first of which is that pretty tough to even fit a piece of paper between many of the candidates on their policy positions. So it doesn't make for a terribly interesting discussion because there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of agreement, maybe differences in expression or degree, but generally people are really pretty aligned on the values and on the policies that make up the New Democrat offer. And of course, the second bigger problem is that there's absolutely no pathway to implementing any of those policies if the party does not get up off of the ground, starting with having party status as soon as is humanly possible. And so my hey you kind of going out to the members who will be speaking to the candidates and the campaigns and to the campaigns themselves as we get into these closing weeks. You need to show the how. So each of the 3 kind of front runner candidates has a theory of the game about who the party needs to be talking to in order to rebuild. So, you can see Heather McPherson is really sort of focused particularly on winning back some of those liberal NDP switchers. Of course, she's also talked about the need to win back some conservative voters as well. But she's got a particular theory of the game. Avi Lewis has talked a lot about mobilizing people on the left by taking sort of further left positions and bringing new people out to vote. You've got Rob Ashton, who talks really quite specifically to the NDP working class voters who've been lost to the Conservatives. All of these are somewhat different diagnoses and theories of what it would take to rebuild. All of these have different implications in terms of seat count type of outreach, where the vote universe might be expanding. I think all of these have different levels of probability of working. But of course, that's something that I think that needs to be really openly discussed in the closing days of the campaign. So my hey you is please show your math, show where you want to grow, show who you are going to be talking to, who you're speaking to. And that will do a great service in helping those members make their decision as we come up to that leadership convention.
All right. Scott.
My hey you goes out to the Prime Minister for something he didn't do. And it's also, I suppose, by implication, addressed to the pessimists and the minimizers, a group that I typically belong to, those that try to minimize news that might be seen as good, those that choose to be pessimistic when there is always a possibility of being optimistic. Supreme Court of the United States rules against Trump. He goes absolutely apeshit. That press conference was one of the most satisfying spectacles I've enjoyed in quite a while. And he's screaming about how they betrayed him personally and they're traitors and all this sort of stuff. And
disgraces to their families.
Disgraces to their families and so on and so forth. So, but the Prime Minister did not do something. He did not issue a statement. He did not call a press conference. He did not utter a syllable. And I really like that. It sounds counterintuitive, but I really like it. And I don't think it was born just of caution. Oh my God, the bear's been wounded, so be careful. He's never more dangerous. I don't think it was just that. I think it was a little bit more calculated of, this is actually a significant victory. And we have been so beaten up and beaten down with the impulsivity of Trump's manner towards Canada, calling us a colony, throwing the American flag across our land mass, diminishing our prime ministers, harming our industries and workers. And we keep convincing ourselves that there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing anybody can ever do about it, all this kind of. But if you look at it, this is a massive blow to him. It really is. And yes, he has more options, but he is indisputably politically weaker. Options available to him are harder and will take longer to implement, or the immediate things that he can do are less significant and will take and are shorter lived in terms of their opportunity. I'm not saying all this. If you're working in the steel and auto, aluminum industries, you're still feeling every bit of the hurt today. But the politics of this are moving heavily against him. The rule of law is starting to constrain him. His options are growing fewer. And for Canada, where that takes us, I think, is just take a breath. Don't rush to get a deal. Don't rush to be there. Manage our way through chapter by chapter, sentence by sentence, because everything that he wants to do to harm us is going to be harder for him to pull off as time unfolds. And so I love the fact that the Prime Minister chose not to make a statement, because I think that's probably the best thing. Just let the guy stew in the juice that he's created for himself. And I think that served Canada well.
All right. Thank you. My hey you goes out to Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, and it relates to the Alberta discussion we were having on this show and about an ultimate separation referendum in Alberta. Saskatchewan and Alberta are in many respects effectively one political culture, and there's tremendous overlap in the thinking and the ideas and media, etc., in all those places. So you need to step up. Premier Moe, you and your government need to step up and play a leadership role for Canada. You need to not be holding town halls where you indulge people about chemtrails. You need to be out there campaigning for Canada and telling people that Saskatchewan and Alberta are better off in Canada, making the case for Canada. And I think that you feel comfortable enough now to do that, and it will be important to the result in Alberta if you do it. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Okay, folks, Accursed, thank you for listening and watching today, whatever you were doing. Fred, Jordan, Scott, thank you for joining me as always. To our sponsors, thank you for your support of this pod, and to all of you, we'll see you next Monday with more of the Curse of Politics. But thanks for today; it was great. Enjoyed this.